Hi everyone, welcome back to my educational channel on biology. I'm Teacher Janet, and in this chapter 8, Biodiversity, we are going to discuss 8.1, the classification system and naming of organisms. So this is the first video, part 1, and there will be a part 2 and part 3. Now our beautiful Earth is inhabited by a diverse array of organisms, spanning from the microscopic creatures like algae, as shown here, and bacteria, to the huge creatures like the rhinoceros and the blue whale. And not forgetting the house cat and also insects. And we also have plants living on Earth. So do you know that in spite of the numerous types of organisms, scientists have managed to systematically categorize them all into the various groups based on similar features? It's also an achievement to be able to give each and every known organism a name consisting of 2 words, whether they are microscopic bacteria or gigantic plants or even the ancient dinosaurs. Let's find out more about the classification system and the naming of organisms and how they are done. The learning standards for this lesson are as follows. Firstly, we should be able to explain the necessity of the classification system and the naming of organisms. Secondly, we should be able to describe the hierarchical classification of organisms into 6 kingdoms. Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. These are the 6 kingdoms. Now, lastly, this will be in the second video, we'll describe the main features of organisms in each kingdom. So, what's the name of this organism shown here? And what's its kingdom? So let's find out more. Firstly, let's discuss the necessity of the classification system, the importance of having a classification system, and the naming of organisms. In Form 2, you have studied a bit about biodiversity. So the definition for biodiversity is that it is the variety of living organisms such as microorganisms, animals, and plants that interact with each other on Earth. So our Earth is filled with a lot of different types of organisms, from the minute and tiny microorganisms to the large organisms, right? Now, how are these organisms categorized and named? So taxonomy is a field in biology which involves the classification of organisms, identification of organisms, and the naming of organisms in an organized manner. Take, for example, our popular house cats or domestic cat as compared to wild cats that live in the wild. So the house cat has been classified under the kingdom Animalia, and it is also classified in class Mammalia, right? How do we identify the cat? So we have to know its characteristics, like it has 4 legs, it has fur on its body, it gives birth to live young, and it is warm-blooded and so forth, right? So through the characteristics, we will be able to identify the house cat, and we also have given the house cat a name, a scientific name, all right? So the scientific name is given so that there is a genus and a species involved. So this naming of organisms is done in an organized manner. So what's the name, the scientific name for the house cat? Is Felis catus, right? The domestic cat. So Felis is the genus and catus is the species. Now, that's how taxonomy has helped to categorize organisms and also name them. Now, Carolus Linnaeus is the scientist who created a system to name and classify organisms that are still used today. That's how we get Felis catus for the domestic cat, right? Which is the name for the domestic cat. So Carolus Linnaeus is called the father of taxonomy. Taxonomy here means something to do with classification, the father of classification of organisms. Now, taxonomy strives to manage information and data which has been collected using a systematic and methodical approach to elucidate, that means to make something clear to the scientific community. So what is made clear is that the information about each organism, all right, about the characteristics of the organism and its classification. So why is classification and naming of organisms important? All organisms need to be scientifically classified based on defining features or characteristics in a systematic manner in order to facilitate or to make easy the studies and discussions among scientists at the international level, peringkat antarabangsa. So when a scientist from Malaysia goes to the international conference, he will meet scientists from other countries. Let's say he wants to refer to the bunga raya. He cannot just say bunga raya because other scientists may not understand what he's saying. Okay, they know other languages. For example, a scientist from Hawaii will refer to the bunga raya with another name, right? So now we know that the scientific name for bunga raya or the national flower of Malaysia is Hibiscus rosa sinensis. So this is the name that is used for this plant at the international level during discussions among the scientists. Okay, right. So let's come back to our house cats, right? So do you know that the house cat has been classified as follows? Its kingdom is Animalia, right? Its phylum, this is a smaller group. Phylum is a smaller group than kingdom. The phylum is Chordata, means that it belongs to the vertebrate group, not the invertebrate group. Okay. Class Mammalia is a mammal. Order Carnivora, that means it's a carnivore. It eats meat or other animals. Family Felidae, which includes the big cats like the lion, tiger, and puma. Now its genus is Felis and the species is Catus, right? So do you know that the house cat is the smallest member of the family Felidae, and it's also the domestic member, a cat that is can be found in households and is able to live in homes and interact with the family. So the taxonomic classification system involves three aspects, and the acronym is CIN, as in Cinderella. The C is for classification, I is for identification, and N is for naming. Now, firstly, classification. Organisms are categorized based on their physical features in a taxonomic hierarchy system. For example, yeast is categorized as belonging to kingdom fungi because it has the cell wall made of chitin, just like the other members of the kingdom fungi. So based on the yeast physical features like the cell wall, the structure of the cell wall, then these few organisms are grouped together to be in the kingdom fungi together with yeast because they all have the cell wall made of chitin. Right, now identification. Organisms are identified using a dichotomous key which consists of a series of paired statements called couplets. For example, this is a couplet here, two statements that are contrasting. Okay, so based on contrasting characteristics in a group of organisms, thus providing a step-by-step guide toward identify each organism. So usually if there are like three organisms, let's say the ant, the fish, and an earthworm is grouped together. So how do you identify each organism? By using a dichotomous key. The word dichotomous means a contrast between two things. So there are two opposing statements here. Now, firstly, we can state that if the organism has legs, it is an ant. Okay, so the ant has 6 legs, and the fish and the worm does not have any legs. Next, so the second statement in the couplet is does not have legs. Go to 2. So when you go to number 2, it will be another couplet or paired statement that are contrasting. All right. For example, have scales, has scales, and has no scales. So has scales is the fish, and then has no scales, go to 3, or is the worm straight away, earthworm, right? Now, naming. So organisms are named using a binomial nomenclature system. So the common hibiscus plant is named Hibiscus rosa sinensis. This is the scientific name for the hibiscus plant. So every organism is named by using the name of the genus of the organism and the species, the name of the species. We will find out more about identification and naming in the coming topics. Now, the classification of organisms. All organisms in the world can be categorized into 6 kingdoms, which are Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, or Animalia. So Archaebacteria is the most primitive and also the most ancient type of organism. And by primitive, we mean that it has a simpler structure, right, at the cellular level. And going down until Animalia, it gets more and more complex. The cells become more and more complex, right? So what's the memory tip to remember these 6 kingdoms? King Papa had fun in Europe. King stands for kingdom. So this acronym is about the kingdoms, right? The kingdoms of life. Then Papa, P is for Plantae, A for Animalia, another P for Protista, another A for Archaebacteria. Fun stands for fungi, and Europe stands for, the U stands for bacteria. Simple, right? King Papa had fun in Europe. So think of the children of the king. Children of the king call their father King Papa, right? Had fun in Europe. Maybe the king went skiing in the mountains, right? And he had a lot of fun playing the sport or getting involved in the sport. So these are the 6 kingdoms of life. Kingdom Animalia, made up of all the animals that usually can move, right? Most of them can move. Then Kingdom Plantae consists of the plants, which are quite advanced. Their tissues are quite advanced. And then we have Fungi. Kingdom Fungi consists of all the mushrooms, yeast, and so forth, right, that cannot carry out photosynthesis because they don't have chlorophyll. And then we have Kingdom Protista, which consists of the protozoa, the single-celled organisms that are animal-like. They can move, and some of them have the characteristics of animals, but they are not animals because they are not so advanced as Kingdom Animalia. Okay? So the protozoa and the algae in this kingdom, Protista. So algae are the green organisms that have chlorophyll to carry out photosynthesis. Now, Eubacteria, okay, is one of the simple forms of life. They are single-celled or unicellular, but they can join together to form a chain or a group of cells, right? And they have different shapes. Now, next is the last one is Archaebacteria, which are more primitive than Eubacteria, and they have simpler structures. All right, so they are different from Eubacteria because the cell walls do not contain a compound, okay, called peptidoglycan, whereas Eubacteria has cell walls that are made up of peptidoglycan. We'll talk about that later, okay. But other than that, Archaebacteria may have some of them have shapes that are a bit similar to the Eubacteria. So we'll be discussing the differences among Archaebacteria and Eubacteria in our next video, right? And also the characteristics of all the different kingdoms. Classification of organisms. How was it done? So the organisms are classified into the various kingdoms based on the type of cell, whether it's prokaryote or an eukaryote organism. We'll discuss that later. The number of cells, whether the organism has only one cell or is made up of many cells or more than one cell. And then their type of nutrition. Are they autotrophs that can produce or synthesize their own organic food substances, or are they heterotrophs? Okay, that depend on other organisms to obtain nutrients and food, and they cannot synthesize their own organic food substances. Firstly, let's discuss these two terms, prokaryote and eukaryote. What is a prokaryote? The word pro means before, and karyote has to do with a nucleus. For example, karyokinesis is the division of the nucleus, as we have studied in the topic of mitosis and meiosis. All right. So prokaryotes are cells that lack a membrane-bound nucleus, which we call the true nucleus, and membrane-enclosed organelles. Okay, so I'll come to that later. Now we'll look at the examples. Examples are the bacteria, such as Archaebacteria. It is a kingdom of its own, a group of so-called ancient bacteria, such as Sulfolobus species, and Eubacteria are the true bacteria. Examples are Vibrio cholerae that causes cholera. So bacteria in general, which are single-celled organisms that are more simple in structure, okay, not so advanced compared to other organisms, they have the the condition where their cells are prokaryotic, or they are prokaryotes. Okay, so for example, this is a bacterial cell. It has an outer capsule, and then the second layer is the cell wall, and the third layer is the plasma membrane, and inside here is the cytoplasm, and there are ribosomes floating in the cytoplasm. The ribosomes are not membrane bound. They don't have a membrane surrounding them. Okay, they're just made up of the subunits. So their function is to produce proteins, okay, for the bacteria. Then we have the DNA in the nucleus. So nucleus is an area that contains the DNA, but as you can observe, it has no nuclear membrane surrounding it. The DNA is floating in the nucleus here, all right? So bacteria do not have nuclear membrane surrounding the DNA. So we don't call this a nucleus, all right? It's just DNA in a nucleus. So nucleus is the space or area that contains the DNA. We cannot label this as a nucleus, because a nucleus must have a membrane surrounding it that is called the nuclear membrane, as seen in this picture of the eukaryotic cell. Okay, so prokaryotes are cells that lack the membrane-bound nucleus. As you can see here, there's no membrane surrounding the DNA, so we cannot call this a nucleus. So this type of cell lacks a membrane-bound nucleus, and furthermore, it does not have membrane-enclosed organelles such as rough endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, mitochondrion, and so forth. Okay, so let's go on to eukaryotes. So eu means true. The word eu means true. Karyote means nucleus, so true nucleus. That means eukaryotes are cells or contain cells that have the true nucleus, a nucleus with the nuclear membrane. Okay, the nucleus with the nuclear membrane. That's what we call a nucleus. So eukaryotes are cells that, or eukaryotes have cells that has a membrane-bound nucleus, and also membrane-enclosed organelles such as the mitochondria, lysosome, Golgi apparatus, vacuole, and endoplasmic reticulum, as you can see here. So this is an eukaryotic cell. Inside we can see the DNA in the nucleus, and the nucleus is enclosed in the nuclear membrane. So this can be labeled, this organelle can be labeled the nucleus. It has a membrane surrounding it, which is the nuclear membrane. Okay, so this type of nucleus, the nucleus is only found in the eukaryotic cells, or the eukaryotes. And this type of cell is more advanced than the prokaryotic cell that's found in prokaryotes. Now, what about membrane-enclosed organelles? Now you can see here, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, mitochondria, they're all bounded by a membrane. The outer line here is the membrane. Okay, now the white line here is the membrane. And for mitochondrion, it has the inner and outer membrane, double membranes. And so does the, can you name it another organelle with double membrane? Yes, the chloroplast has an inner and an outer and inner membrane, outer and inner membrane. Lysosome has a single membrane, okay, enclosing it. Now, ribosome is different. Ribosome is not a membrane enclosed organelle, okay? So ribosome is found in bacteria too, okay, and also in the eukaryotes. Now, examples of eukaryotes or eukaryotic cells are as found in algae, protozoa, fungi, animals, and plants. So these are all more advanced in their structures compared to bacteria, which are prokaryotes. Okay. Examples of algae are Chlamydomonas species, a unicellular algae, protozoa, a single-celled organism, such as Paramecium. They are eukaryotes, compared to bacteria, which are prokaryotes. Fungi, now this single cell fungi is here is yeast, right? Then animals and plants are multicellular, and every one of their cells are eukaryotic cells. So here's a 2D picture showing you all the organelles in the eukaryotic cell. Now, where are the membrane-bound organelles? Now, so the nucleus is the first membrane-bound organelle. It has a nuclear membrane, as you can see here. All right. So this is a membrane-bound organelle, the nucleus. It's only found in eukaryotic cells. Okay. And for prokaryotic cells, they do not have nuclear membrane, so they don't have a nucleus. Right. And their DNA is just found in the nucleus, the region called the nucleus for prokaryotic cells. Apart from that, we have the membrane-bound organelles such as the Golgi apparatus. All right, as in you can see the membrane is the black line here, and then the mitochondrion, which has double membranes, the inner and outer membrane, and then lysosome, rough endoplasmic reticulum, smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and vacuoles. All these have membrane surrounding them. All right. Now, only the ribosomes and the centrioles here are not bound by the membranes. All right. So if you were to enlarge this structure of the ribosome, it's actually made up of two subunits, that's all, but it's not surrounded by a membrane. So let's discuss this pair of terms, autotroph and heterotroph. What's the difference? Auto means self, and troph has something to do with feeding, the feeding of the organism. So an autotroph is a self-feeder. That means it can synthesize its own food, its own organic compounds from inorganic substances by using light energy through photosynthesis or by using chemical energy through chemosynthesis. Right. For green plants, as shown here, they contain chlorophyll to absorb sunlight, and they use it to produce the organic food substances through photosynthesis, right? And they use carbon dioxide and water as the substrates to produce the organic food compounds that is needed by them for growth, development and growth. And we also have algae. So there are two types of algae, the unicellular algae, like this one shown here, which has a U-shaped chloroplast. This is Chlamydomonas, all right? And then multicellular algae are the seaweeds growing at the bottom of the sea. They have also got the chlorophyll to absorb sunlight for photosynthesis, okay? But they are not, some of them are not plants. I mean, some of the seaweeds growing in the sea, they are not, they are plants, and most are the algae, right? So phytoplankton in the sea are tiny algae cells, mostly unicellular cells, which can also carry out photosynthesis. Okay, they're also green in color. So this is an important producer in the sea. It's actually tiny algae cells, right, that can carry out photosynthesis. So for land plants, they also are the producers in the food chains. Now, apart from plants and algae, some bacteria, like the cyanobacteria, also contain chlorophyll to carry out photosynthesis, right? And then apart from that, there are some other bacteria that carry out chemosynthesis using chemical energy from chemical reactions to synthesize their food. Right, then how about heterotrophs? Heterotrophs are different. Okay, that's why we have the word hetero. Hetero means different or other, and troph is again the feeder here. So different feeder, different from the self-feeder, different from the autotrophs. So a heterotroph is an organism that cannot synthesize its own food, but it obtains the food molecules or the nutrients by eating other organisms. Okay, so the most common example are the animals, right? That's either eat plants or they may eat other animals. Okay, as an example. Now, apart from that, we have most bacteria as that are heterotrophs. Most bacteria are heterotrophs. So for bacteria, there are few ways that they are heterotrophs. Okay, some bacteria, they are parasites. They live in the bodies of living organisms and cause disease, right? But they obtain their nutrients from the host, okay, from the host. So this one type of bacteria, and the other type of bacteria decomposes food or waste substances or other substances. So when they decompose the organic substances, they get their energy from there, okay? But they cannot synthesize their own food through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Now, most protozoa are heterotrophs, except for Euglena, right? Euglena has a chloroplast, and it can carry out photosynthesis. So Euglena is a self-feeder. It's an autotroph. It's a sort of kekecualian. It's an unusual example. Okay, but most protozoa like amoeba here are heterotrophs. Fungi, all fungi are heterotrophs because they don't have chlorophyll to absorb sunlight for photosynthesis. Okay, they don't have chlorophyll. You don't see something like a green fungi with chlorophyll in it, right? So all fungi are heterotrophs. Lastly, the term unicellular and multicellular. What is the difference between these two terms? Unicellular organisms consist of only one cell. Examples are Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protozoa. Okay, Protozoa means one-celled animal-like organism. Some algae and some fungi, right? So all bacteria are unicellular. Archaebacteria and Eubacteria, they are all unicellular. Protozoa, for example, amoeba, paramecium, euglena, they are unicellular. Now, some algae that are microscopic are unicellular, right? As opposed or in contrast to the seaweeds that live in the ocean, right? So this algae is actually Chlamydomonas, and it is a unicellular type of algae. Okay, then the algae that forms the phytoplankton in the sea or pond, which we call the green scum. Okay, it's green color, but the cells are very tiny, and they are unicellular algae. Okay, which are the phytoplankton, which form the phytoplankton. Now, some fungi are unicellular. Common example is yeast. So yeast is a unicellular organism that can produce new buds that separate from it. Okay, but it's a unicellular organism. But multicellular. Multicellular organism consists of more than one cell. For example, some types of algae that form structures like seaweeds. Okay, they are like seaweeds on the ocean floor or in the ponds. So they have leaf-like structures like this, which we call the thallus, but they are not so complex in structure as the plant leaves. All right, so that's why algae are simpler in structure compared with plants. And then some fungi are multicellular. For example, mushrooms and bread mold, called the mucor species, they're all multicellular, consisting of more than one cell. Then all plants and all animals are multicellular. So these are some notes for the definition of the terms that we are studying here, prokaryote and eukaryote, which we have already discussed. You can jot this down if you want. And here we see the prokaryotic cells. Their DNA is not enclosed by a nuclear membrane. Okay, so they are prokaryotic. And this is more primitive, not so advanced compared to eukaryotic cells. They have a nuclear membrane and surrounding the DNA. So this whole thing forms the nucleus. Then autotroph and heterotroph. Okay, as we have discussed just now, autotroph are organisms that can synthesize their own food from simple inorganic substances like carbon dioxide and water by using light energy through photosynthesis or chemical energy through chemosynthesis. Whereas heterotrophs are organisms that cannot synthesize their own food but obtain food molecules by eating other organisms, right? Or they may be like parasites that live on in the bodies of organisms and absorb the food from the organisms, from the host. Then unicellular and multicellular organisms have been discussed. So all bacteria, either Archaebacteria or Eubacteria, they are all unicellular. Okay, and Protozoa is a unicellular organism, and also some fungi like yeast are unicellular. Okay, so here's an overview of how organisms are classified based on three characteristics of the organisms, which are the type of cells, the number of cells, and type of nutrition. Now, for type of cells, we have to consider whether they are prokaryotes or eukaryotes, right? And as we have defined, the type of cell, which is a prokaryote, it lacks a membrane-bound nucleus and membrane-enclosed organelles. Examples are Archaebacteria and Eubacteria. All right, they don't have a membrane surrounding the DNA. Now, eukaryotes, they have a membrane-bound nucleus, where the nucleus, the outermost layer of the nucleus is the nuclear membrane, and they have membrane-enclosed organelles like mitochondria. Unicellular organisms are single-celled organisms, and multicellular organisms have more than one cell. Now, autotroph means an organism that can synthesize its own food from inorganic materials by using light energy or chemical energy, and heterotrophs are organisms that cannot synthesize their own food but obtain the food molecules or nutrients by eating other organisms. Now, since this chart is an overview of what we have discussed earlier in the previous slides, it's up to you whether you want to copy it down, because the definitions are repeated here, right? But it will help you to remember the facts better. So finally, we come to this table, which shows us the 6 kingdoms of organisms that live on planet Earth and also what their characteristics are like. Now, for Archaebacteria and Eubacteria, they have these similarities. Both are prokaryotes, both are unicellular organisms, and both are autotrophs or heterotrophs. Very similar. The main difference is that Eubacteria has a cell wall made of peptidoglycan and Archaebacteria does not. So we are going to come to that in the next video. Now you must know examples of Archaebacteria and Eubacteria. Archaebacteria are sometimes called the ancient bacteria because they exist before the Eubacteria, right? The primitive bacteria. Archaebacteria are primitive or ancient bacteria. Examples are sulfolobus species, which are sulfur oxidizing bacteria. Whereas Eubacteria, the true bacteria, one example is Salmonella species, which causes food poisoning and diarrhea. Okay, so this is a bacteria that causes disease. Now, Protista, they are eukaryotes. That means they have the membrane-bound nucleus and membrane-enclosed organelles, right? So they are unicellular or multicellular. Now, the unicellular organisms in kingdom Protista are the protozoa and some algae, some types of algae. And then the multicellular organisms in kingdom Protista are the big algae right, that live in the sea, the marine algae that forms the seaweed. We call them seaweed, all right? But some seaweed are actually plants. Okay, some seaweeds, they may be plants, but some are algae. So autotroph or heterotroph. They're either autotroph like algae or autotrophs, or they may be heterotrophs like amoeba species, right? Then fungi. Fungi, the organisms in this kingdom are all eukaryotes, unicellular or multicellular, heterotrophs. Example is Mycena hematopus. We'll talk more about these organisms in the next video, right? Then the last two. Next, the two most advanced organisms are found in kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia. So both are eukaryotes, both are multicellular, but plants are autotrophs. Exception, can you give me one exception of a plant that's not an autotroph? Yes, it's the parasite. Parasitic plant called what? Rafflesia species, all right, which we have studied in another topic. So that is an exception, okay, of a plant that's not an autotroph. It's a parasite. Rafflesia species is a parasite. Now, example of a plant which is an autotroph is Coleus blume. So this plant is a decorative plant, right? And it has chlorophyll to carry out photosynthesis. Now, let's go on to Animalia. They are all heterotrophs, all right? Now, example is Alcedo attis, the common kingfisher. So one more point to note is that in the textbook, in one part on this page, it mentions that animals, they are unicellular animals. But elsewhere, they write that animals are multicellular. So I would stick to this fact that animals are multicellular. If you want to look for unicellular animal-like organisms, it will be the protozoa, like amoeba and paramecium. So that's all for this lesson. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video, which will be on the 6 kingdoms and their characteristics. I will also give you a useful acronym to remember the names of the 6 kingdoms. So if you found this video interesting and useful, please do share, like and subscribe to my channel. Till then, take care and all the best to you. Goodbye for now.